Wow, it has been quite a while since I've actually talked about anime on this channel, hasn't it? Well, either way, this is a perfect anime to start with because, man, oh man, we are now over and done with the first, and hopefully first of many seasons to come, of God of High School. And these are my final thoughts on the God of High School. So let's get started. So I did my initial third episode thoughts of the God of High School back a little while ago, and I tend to play by those rules for a lot of the shows that I watch solely because I enjoy actually seeing the show develop a little bit, and if it catches me, I'll continue on. And yeah, this show really caught me right at episode probably 2, and by 3, I was all on board. But for a show like this that comes from a webtoon, not too dissimilarly from how a lot of anime come from manga, this did have some adaptation in order to fit the show into a timely manner that the original webtoon artist didn't really have to do. And I'll get more into that later, but it does become a bit more noticeable. But for starters, let's talk about something that actually really caught me right off the bat, and it's the thing that you'll probably notice right out of the gate if you start this show, which is the animation. So I've watched anime for a long time now, and one of the big things I've always noticed is the first episode hook, where something in the animation always has to be cranked up to 11 for the first episode to catch the viewer's attention and really show off what this show can look like. And then we usually don't see that level of detail and that level of animation prowess show up until about the end of the season. But this series as a whole really took a different approach to that by actually carrying the animation prowess of episode 1 on through as many episodes as they could. There's even a behind the scenes where they show motion capture of the sort of fighting process, which in a show that primarily revolved around fighting, the motion of the characters is very important, and they nailed that. Now, my guess would be that they can keep up a lot of this animation prowess because they do break up the fighting by, well, giving us a lot of talking parts, especially when it came to listening to the administration staff of the tournament, and later on in the season seeing a lot of other background characters start to crop up, and even moments with our main characters like Mira and Mori and all these other characters sort of just doing their day-to-day outside of the tournament. But apart from the animation, which I'm always a huge fan of great animation, one of the other things that caught my attention with this show was the character behind the characters. So each of the characters has their own unique reason for being there, as you'd expect from a show like this, and really any show, you gotta have backstory for a character. But the backstory for one character in particular really does give you sort of this sense of mystery on top of already knowing what the character wants in his heart. So you have what the character wants and his backstory as to why he wants it, and then an entirely other backstory, which we'll get into spoilers later to talk about, and that whole other want and backstory is really completely separate and takes us kind of by complete surprise. But earlier I mentioned pacing, and pacing is one of the most important things to any story. Alongside the characters and their stories and struggles and the story itself, the way that story is paced is extremely important. And this is where things get kind of weird. This scene behind me is a perfect example. There's a moment in the show where Yumira has to go find her sword, and everybody she's met actually go and help her. And this gives us an entire brief moment that builds on these characters' relationships with backstory flashbacks, along with them looking for the sword and showing that both Jinmori and Dewi are both willing to help. And this gives us a really good sense of the characters bonding. But when I went and read the webtoon, it's a big story point. Not to say what they did with the anime wasn't big, it did do a good job of developing character, but it was bigger, and they cut it down for the pacing of the story, and I was fine with that because it did drag a bit as a chapter. But without getting into spoilers, the further I read on with the webtoon to keep up with the show, there are moments in the webtoon that, at least for me, felt like they could have paced it a little differently and still included it in the show. And unfortunately, that does hurt for some stuff. We do rush a little towards the end and it feels a bit confusing, but I kind of chalk that up to some of the moments being character introductions that work better as mysteries, but could have still been better with other elements brought over from the webtoon. But either way, pacing is different with this show. So keep that in mind if you're going to watch it. All right, so that is animation out of the way. We've talked about characters. We've talked about pacing. Now for one of the other extremely important things I've talked about, which is story. So this is where I'm going to get into spoilers. So if you are actually planning to watch this show, go to this timestamp here, and I'll see you then when we're out of the spoiler territory. All right, for everybody else who stuck around, we are going to be talking about spoilers of this story, and we're also going to be talking about spoilers for Halo. It'll make sense in a minute, trust me. So for anybody paying close attention while watching this show, and actually not even close attention, it becomes pretty obvious by like episode 4, but there's obviously a very supernatural thing going on in this show. We see it with administration staff and their abilities. We see it with different characters from the outside coming in to lend a hand during other portions in later episodes. And apart from that, it's just sort of a build-up that we expect to see some kind of payoff to by the end. But really, from the start, it's a pretty cut and dry story. We have a high school fighting tournament with a bunch of high schoolers fighting to get a wish that they want granted. Can't be more cut and dry than that. But by the end, we actually have a shift that a lot of us could probably have seen coming, but I personally wasn't expecting it to be that big of a shift. It's always cool to see a story that shifts from a sort of predictable storyline and plot to a completely different storyline and plot that ideally takes the viewer by surprise, and because of a lot of the background reveals that we as the viewer see, it's not a huge surprise. But it's refreshing nonetheless to see a story shift like that. And the reason why I said we're talking about spoilers in Halo as well is because the last time I remember a story shift like this, where you have a general idea of what's happening, followed by a completely new thing happening with a third party stepping in and becoming a new faction to the battle overall, well, that's Halo. For those of you who haven't played Halo and don't intend to play Halo, either because you're a PC Master Race, PlayStation Master Race, or haven't bought it for an Xbox, the idea with this story is that you are fighting an alien enemy and you come across a foreign ring world called Halo, and you basically spend a lot of the missions fighting these sets of enemies, and that's all you're familiar with. It's one set of enemies, and they're all you know. Then comes a mission where you're facing off against very, very few enemies that you're familiar with, and then you're alone. And it's revealed that there is a third faction fighting in this war, and the game story shifts from a story of fighting back to survival, and actually takes a bit of a horror twist to it. And it's just thrown in there for those paying mild attention. You can kind of pick up on a few little hints here and there, but nothing major, and then it shifts. That's what this story did. It shifted over to a supernatural fighting battle of the gods style anime in 2 episodes? 3 episodes, I think? Yeah, 3 episodes. Episode 10, 11, 12, 13. That's 4. 4 episodes, because that's how math works. But it shifts to this once we actually get a full reveal of characters with these supernatural abilities showing what they can do and potentially causing damage to the world that our characters are currently, well, living in. And I think that's really cool. I think that the way the story was handled, pacing-wise, does a bit of a disservice to the way that the story is in general, but even with that being said, I think that overall, if the pacing can be improved, we will have a pretty solid season 2, because the story has a ton of potential and just got a lot more interesting because we've been ramped up from high school fighting student to most of these students that we know now borrowing powers from the gods, and one of them being a god. Like, there's a lot of potential with a storyline like that, and I'm pumped to see what happens if they make a season 2. All right, welcome back, spoiler skippers, and yeah, so we're done talking about Halo and this anime, and overall, here are my final thoughts on the show. This is a show that has an incredible story that is somewhat let down by its pacing, and I think if they can improve on that by season 2, especially considering where season 1 left off, we have the potential to get an incredible storyline with incredible characters leading out from where we left off. Pacing, like I said, could be better, and I hope that they improve on that by the second season if they make one. The characters are genuinely enjoyable to watch, and their growth within just the first season is awesome. I think each of these characters has a ton of potential that, if taken advantage of correctly, can mean that we have some really awesome characters. Again, with all the potential from the end of this season, I will be very disappointed if they don't properly take advantage of this. And the animation. Starting out from the first episode, this animation did not disappoint. And there are even scenes where the animation isn't held to the same fully colored, amazing standard, but they do it in such a way that it might be simpler and look simpler to animate, but it still looks incredible and fits the tone of the episode that it's used in. I'm specifically talking about this fight. But either way, it looks amazing, I'm impressed with it, and it hooks me. And hopefully it hooks you. I hope you guys really do give this show a shot. If not, that's fine. Everybody's got their own preferences, but I love it. I am calling it a great anime, and I think that by hopefully the next season, we will have some of the stuff that people complain about ironed out, like the pacing. But either way, I enjoyed this show. I really hope they get a season 2. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed this video as well. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And I just realized I didn't even talk about the fact this is an original animation from Crunchyroll. I don't know why I expected it to be any different than something animated by an anime studio off of a manga, but it's not. It's held to the same standard and delivers just as well as a manga converted into an anime. Better in some instances. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Check out the links in the description. Also check out the link down there where you can buy some of my merch. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think. If you think this show's good, if you think it's bad, anything in between. And apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.